In today's video, we're going to be covering off all the gear that you're going to need to cook and eat when you are out on the trail, as well as my tips and recommendations for how best to carry and treat water on the New Zealand Great Walks. Alright, so let's move on to our cooking gear, our stoves, anything that we need to water and feed ourselves while we're on the trail. So at the outset, I will mention that if you're staying at any one of the Great Walk huts during that Great Walk season, you will probably have gas provided to the hut, and there will probably be some kind of a stove for you to cook on. So you don't really need to worry about having your own stove and fuel to take with you. But there are a couple of caveats to that. The first one is that there are a few huts in the Great Walk network that don't have those facilities provided, so you will need to take something to cook with. And also, of course, if you're staying in campgrounds along the way, then they will not have any stoves or fuels provided at those campgrounds, so you'll need to make sure you've got your own means of cooking with you. Now, I personally choose to take fuel and stove with me on any Great Walk anyway, and that's mainly because mine is nice and compact and lightweight anyway, so it doesn't really take up too much extra space in my pack, but also just in case there's an emergency. And there have been a few occasions on Great Walks where tracks have been washed out, services haven't been able to be provided, you know, there's been something that's happened that's potentially meant that there aren't any cooking facilities at the hut. And if you're out in the wilderness, your number one responsibility is to provide for yourself anyway. My stove of choice, and the one that I would recommend to beginners, is the MSR Pocket Rocket stove. It is very small and compact and relatively lightweight, can be attached onto just about any kind of fuel canister, and I'd say that if you're just taking one just as a backup, probably just a small 110 gram fuel canister will do you, but if you can fit it, a 230 gram canister will cover off all eventualities, especially if there are more than one person in your group. I would recommend you stay away from things like Jetboil stoves or the all-in-one systems that have pots and then the burners built in, just because they tend to weigh a little bit more. And like I said, if you're just taking it just for the off chance that you might not be able to use the hut facilities, then it's a lot of extra weight and a lot of extra bulk, probably for no extra gain. But of course, it all does come down to personal preference. You can take what you like. I'd just encourage you to take that into consideration. You will also need to take a lighter with you. Not only is this one of the recommended emergency items that you should take on any hike or tramp, but obviously if you're taking your own stove, you're going to need something to light it with. And even if you're not, in my experience, there's not always things to light the stoves with at the huts anyway. Now, one thing I haven't mentioned to date is that the huts are very basic. Don't expect to find things like linens and pillows. Don't expect to find things like utensils and cooking pots and pans. You need to take all of that kind of stuff with you if you think that you're going to need it. And you might think that choosing a camping pot would be a very simple exercise, but actually there are a lot of considerations that go into this. For example, are you hiking by yourself or are you going in a group? If you're going in a group, then chances are you're going to have to cook a much larger batch of food for more people that can be spread over multiple plates. Now, I personally, because I hike on my own a lot of the time, just tend to take one relatively small pot just for me, and also because I dehydrate all of my own food, the only thing that I need that pot to do is boil water. Basically, I boil the water and then I pour my food in there and let it soak until it is ready to eat. But if you're going to need to simmer food in that pot, then obviously you're going to need something that's capable of doing that. And also, if you're in a group and you need to make a larger batch of food, then you might need to have a bigger pot than something that I would carry. So it is a good idea to have a think about what you're actually going to eat your food with, and I would encourage you not to take too many utensils and things with you. So for example, I personally don't take a plate with me, I just eat straight out of my pot, but I do only have just a long-handled spoon that I take with me rather than a full set of knives, fork and spoon. And again, this is a little bit to do with weight, but it's also just to do with convenience. It's less things that you have to worry about when you're at the hut trying to do all your dishes and making sure that you're not going to lose anything. It's a little bit less bulk as well, and I find that a spoon will do most things that you need it to do when you're actually out there on the trail. But I do take with me as well just a very small, lightweight knife. Now, usually I'm just using this to do things like opening packaging, potentially even cutting some cheese, but it is a good idea to carry some kind of a knife with you, and you don't need something something that's really big. A little pocket knife will be just fine. It's completely up to you whether you want to take any other kinds of plateware with you. I've seen a lot of people take just little plastic plates with them to eat out of. Typically I've found that it's generally groups of people that will take things like plateware and cups and things like that, because they're cooking in one pot, and so they then need to be able to distribute it amongst multiple people. I personally don't use a plate, but I do use a little collapsible Sea to Summit mug, which I like to have my tea or coffee out of in the mornings, and also maybe a hot chocolate at night time. And that to me isn't a massive disadvantage, because it collapses down nice and small, and it actually just sits nicely in the bottom of my pot when I pack it away the next day. If you don't want to use one of those collapsible mugs, then you can use obviously something like a little aluminium or titanium camping mug, and if you find that that becomes an issue to try and squeeze into your pack with all the other gear, then they can also be really easily hung on the outside of your pack if necessary. You will also need to take some kind of receptacle for your rubbish as well. I personally just use a large plastic Ziploc bag that tends to keep all of my rubbish nice and compact. Don't forget to follow the pack it in, pack it out rules. Anything that you take onto the trail with you, you must also bring out as well. And lastly, the final thing that I carry is a Dyneema Cuban fiber bag, which I dedicate as my food bag. This is generally where I put all of my food in for the day. It sits right in the top of my pack for easy access, and it just enables me to keep all my food items separate from all the other items in my pack. Water is the next most important thing to think about when you're out on the trail, and you will find a lot of people out there telling you that there's no real need to filter water when you're out in the backcountry in New Zealand. For the most part, that's fine. I've not really had any issues with water quality when I've been out on the trail, but it's not to say that it doesn't happen. And especially when you think about where the water is coming from, at most of these huts and campsites it's just rainwater draining off of a roof. Anything could get up onto that roof and poop all over it and potentially contaminate the water. I know that it's quite frequently common for rats and mice to fall into rainwater tanks as well, so it's always a good idea to have some method of treating your water with you. And personally, I'd rather treat my water every single time and spend a little bit of extra time doing that than contract some kind of awful gastric disease whilst I'm out in the middle of nowhere. So there are a vast range of different ways that you can treat your water, right from the very basic, making sure that you're boiling it for 3 minutes beforehand before you use it for anything. You also can go through to proper water filters. So I have used in the past a Sawyer Squeeze water filter. It is very handy, very easy to use for beginners. I'm currently using a Katadyn BeFree water filter, which I also find very convenient because it's got its own reservoir attached to it. There are things like SteriPens, obviously iodine tablets, bleach has even been used as well, so a vast array of different options, and it'll just come down to your preference what you want to use. The only thing I'd say is that if you are using a water filter, something like the Sawyer Squeeze or the Katadyn BeFree, just bear in mind that they can freeze if the temperature gets down low enough at night time, making them impossible to use. So if you're going to take something like that with you and the temperature does start to drop, put it in a little plastic bag and perhaps put it in your sleeping bag at night time just to try and keep it a bit warm and prevent it from breaking. You'll also need to make sure that you've got the capacity to carry enough water with you for the particular journey that you're going on. Now this again is a very personal thing, it just depends on what kind of a hiker you are. I know that I don't drink a lot when I'm actually out hiking, but then I'll stock up on water when I get to the hut at the end of the day. But if you're somebody who drinks a lot, then you're probably going to want to carry more water with you during the day. So I would carry a litre with me for an entire day's worth of hiking if I'm going to be hiking about 4 or 5 hours. I would encourage beginners to probably get used to carrying 2 litres of water just in case, especially if you're not going to be topping up your water along the way. So I do stop if there is an ability to top up my water at a stream or a waterfall along the way and filter it into my bottle when I get there. Now a lot of people are starting to use water bladders that they pack into their pack to drink out of. These are of course really convenient, and if you've got a pack that will allow you to put a bladder in there and run a hose out, then I'd highly suggest that you do try and do that. Personally, I haven't yet found a water bladder that doesn't taste absolutely awful when you're drinking it after it's been sitting in there for a while. So I choose instead to use collapsible water pouches. The one that I use is actually from Platypus. It's a 1 litre pouch, and then I also have a 1 litre pouch attached to my water filter as well. So that gives me a 2 litre carrying capacity for very little weight. Again, I'd encourage you to think very carefully about whether you want to take heavier water bottles with you, because these all add to the weight of your pack. It is a really great advantage to have something like a Nalgene water bottle, which can hold hot water as well as cold, and therefore you can use it as a bit of a hot water bottle at night. But just bear in mind that it does also add quite a bit of weight to your pack. That is the end of this installment. I hope that you have found it very helpful and informative in terms of planning your gear list for your upcoming great walks. If it has been a little bit broad and you would like a few more specifics, then please don't hesitate to leave me a comment down below or get in touch with me via the contact form on my website. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to stay tuned for the next installment coming soon.